I came to this congregation seeking community, but suspicious of church communities. I sought others who might welcome me, understand me, accept me, but I was cautious. Sound familiar to anyone? The first few services I attended were not too threatening. Singing, some joining of hands, not enough to scare me off. Wow, that was more than 20 years now. I felt welcomed by what should I call it, the text of the services, the readings and homilies, the principles. The messages here were not the church talk that I had heard before. As to my own spiritual beliefs, I didn't have a clue. But the message here was, no problem, come in, explore with us. Yes, the words spoken here from this pulpit welcomed me. And yes, there was often boldness in that welcome, so different from the preaching that I had known, comforting in its openness, but also challenging in its openness. We come broken, mixed up, patched together, polished to a glorious individual shine by our failures and triumphs. Who was I? Husband, former bartender, high school dropout, self-taught computer programmer, the one boy on his high school football team who got pumped before Saturday's game by listening to the original cast album of a chorus line. Could there be a place here for me? But we need more than the homily, more than words. After the service, there was a social hour. Mingling after the service, relaxed, chatting with others. What a civilized and surprising activity. And sometimes an intimidating activity. Would anyone talk to me? Back at the high school dance, right? Navigating the in-crowds, looking for a welcoming smile or gesture, nonchalantly inching into a conversation circle. Some Sundays I wandered around looking at the art or nosing around a display table in the back. But many people sought me out, found ways to break the ice. Many I see here now, still close friends, others long ago memorialized here, still deeply missed, visible to memory where they sat among us in the circle. And what a gift those welcomes were for me, and how I try to pay that forward. Be warned, if you are newish here, I would love to hear your story. I'm not sure I know what a bolder welcome would look like, but like bold gestures, I think we're going to run into risk and vulnerability. I came to a Sunday service a few years ago feeling very low, not depressed, but overwhelmed, as one can be at times by the world's wrongs. I felt fragile, like I might shatter into a million pieces, holding on by a thread. Have you ever felt that way? The greeter, a church friend that day, waited at the front door, smiling, shaking hands. Seeing me that morning, really seeing me, she paused. "You look like you need a hug," she said. I nodded, and we hugged. A bold, simple, unforgettable gift given and received. Welcoming, belonging, these are not one and dones, nor are they one-way streets. I need to keep coming back. I need to fight my insecurities, battle my anxieties over and over. I need to be vulnerable to be fully welcomed. And I need to call on the memories of my own challenges to fuel my empathy, to be welcoming myself, to be present, to be patient, and curious. I worked as a bartender for many years. One thing I learned, everyone has a story. Not everyone will become your best friend. But then and now, when I suppress the urge to impose my story, when I pause and listen and allow a conversation to evolve, a story, sometimes an entire world, can unfold. And sometimes, in these moments, the seeds of deep connections are planted.
There is a woman named Anne who lives near St. Paul who made me the best cup of coffee I have ever had. It was the weekend of our dear friend Leon's ordination, and we had traveled to Minnesota to be part of the service and the celebration. Anne was a member of the congregation who offered home hospitality to Wendy and myself and several other colleagues. She was up early baking something that smelled incredible, and her warm smile greeted me in the kitchen. She had asked the night before if we would want tea or coffee in the morning, and coffee was a definite yes for me. She poured me a cup and also filled a small thermos so I could have my own hot refills. She set them on a tray with a pitcher of half and half and a small vase of flowers. She gestured to the living room and a big, comfy chair that looked out over the garden. "This is my favorite place to watch the world wake up," she said. She brought in a similar tray for herself, and we sat, drinking coffee and breathing in the wonderful welcome that she offered so generously until others woke up and came to join us. Anne has a gift for hospitality. And for her, it is one of the ways that she practices Unitarian Universalism, and to also honor the memory of her mother, from whom she learned such hospitality and for whom that was an act of faith. Creating a sense of welcome, creating safer spaces, isn't just a fluffy, nice thing that we do. It is at the heart of our faith. The bylaws of the Unitarian Universalist Association are in the process of being reviewed and renewed, particularly Article 2 of the bylaws, which begins with a statement of purpose and a statement of inclusion. As a democratic denomination, we're encouraged to learn about and consider this new language and what it might mean for us if it were approved at our next General Assembly, which will be next June. Over the course of this year, about once a month, we'll be weaving in parts of the proposed and amended Article 2 for our shared consideration and conversations. Our theme this month, A Circle of Belonging, is connected with the statement of inclusion in the UUA bylaws, which reads, "Systems of power, privilege, and oppression have traditionally created barriers for persons and groups with particular identities, ages, abilities, and histories. We pledge to replace such barriers with ever-widening circles of solidarity and mutual respect. We strive to be an association that truly welcomes all persons who share our values. We commit to being an association of congregations that empowers and enhances everyone's participation, especially those with historically marginalized identities." Pledging to replace barriers with ever-widening circles of solidarity and mutual respect doesn't just require intention. It requires effort and a willingness to change. It requires a bolder welcome. I'm reminded of a story shared by Reverend Evan Carvel-Ziemer, a friend and colleague, and who some of you know through their work with UU congregations. Evan had traveled for a ministry conference along with their children, who were then 3 and 4. They were exploring the hotel and riding the escalators, as one might do when traveling with preschoolers. While in the bathroom, Evan's 3-year-old asked why there wasn't a stool so she could reach the sink. "I guess they weren't expecting children," Evan said. "Why aren't they expecting children?" the 4-year-old asked insistently. None of Evan's guesses satisfied either child, who I can testify are both tenaciously curious beings. When visiting new places, including the many congregations that they have attended, Evan's children continued to notice if there's a stool or not. Are they able to wash their hands without someone lifting them up to the sink? Recently, the younger one returned from a restaurant bathroom exclaiming joyfully, "They're expecting children!" It makes a difference to know that you're expected and that your presence matters. And so we do our best to anticipate who might show up and then prepare for everyone's participation. Here, that means offering services and some programs online. A T-loop for those with hearing aids, large print hymnals, ramps into the building, a gender-inclusive bathroom, a variety of food options when there are shared meals, a calmer, quieter room near the sanctuary with the sound piped in for anyone who needs it, for sensory overstimulation, easier hearing, or a baby insisting on crawling and climbing, and so much more. Some of the things we anticipate haven't been figured out yet, like making this circle or this pulpit or the upper floors in Waters House accessible. And so we adjust where something or how something is offered, and it isn't totally optimal. There are always new ways to communicate welcome that we haven't learned yet, and we might need someone to point out for us. If you've noticed something, let us know. For instance, the 8th and 9th grade Our Whole Lives class is meeting downstairs, right next to the pump for the fountains. The pumps are loud, and even with the doors closed, it was difficult for them to hear one another last week. So the fountains are on today as folks arrive, and then they got turned off when their class started. With communication and care, we can create a bolder welcome for one another. But what happens if after we've welcomed one another, all warm and fuzzy and smiling and friendly, what happens if after that someone says something careless or does something else that causes harm? Last week's service focused on processes of repentance and apology. When we say that we want to create a bolder welcome, do we actually mean everyone? The statement of inclusion that was shared earlier says that we will welcome all who share our values. That means that we don't need to welcome someone who intends to come in and physically harm anyone here. We don't need to welcome a person who is spewing hatred and has no desire to change. It is complicated. Every community and congregation that has people in it, including people who share the same values, have people who have been hurt by someone else and people who have caused them harm. That is different than someone who's wanting to come in and create havoc. Reverend Elizabeth Nguyen had some powerful things to say about who is included in a circle of love. She writes, "Some cultures teach that when someone harms another person, they don't belong anymore. They are no longer inside the circle. They are no longer part of the community. Other cultures teach that when someone harms, the circle changes. Boundaries have to be set up to stop the harm. The person who has harmed needs to choose to change the behavior and make right for their wrong. They have to find their way back to themselves. But they are never outside the circle of love. That circle holds them. It is an invitation and an orientation, no matter how unearned, that there is always a way toward love. If part of creating a bolder welcome is really considering who we expect and widening that expectation and then preparing for it, I need to be honest with you. When 100 people or 200 or 300 people are part of a community, I expect that sometimes someone is going to do something that will hurt someone else. We can actually expect that in smaller groups too, right? Like a family, or a classroom, or a workplace, or a group of friends. We can expect that. Someone is going to say something hurtful or mean or sharp or untrue or inconsiderate. Someone is going to ask for help and not get what they need. Someone is going to be disappointed. That someone might even be us. And so, if we should plan for what we expect, then let's prepare for how to prioritize accountability and healing instead of punishment, or instead of planning to leave, carrying our resentments and our hurt with us. Elizabeth Nguyen reminds us that many of us use transformative or restorative justice practices quite naturally when we respond to children. Suppose a child grabs a friend's toy, or hits their parents, or says, "I hate you," to a sibling. At our best human selves, we know that to move forward means not to banish that child, not to hit them back, not to say, "I hate you too." To teach accountability and to bring some healing is to stop the pain that's been caused, to figure out what would make it better or more right, to give the toy back, to say something kind or gentle to their sibling, to apologize, maybe share a hug, as Tom mentioned earlier. Learn how to breathe, or yell or hit a pillow instead of a person. Restorative and transformative justice are not just new and jargony things, Reverend Wynne says. They're skills and ways of being that we've probably experienced in our own lives, regardless of what words we use for them. Moving into a bolder welcome, and maybe a gentler welcome, whether we're in our neighborhood or our schools or out in the community or here in this congregation, invites us into transformative situations. Reverend Renee Rahutsky describes it this way: practicing radical hospitality opens up possibilities for interactions with different people, allowing for diverse experiences and expanded creative interchange. It's about meeting people where they are. It's about learning together. We are all works in progress. Anyone here a work in progress? Yeah. Radical hospitality is about putting our own assumptions up for examination. To me, Reverend Rahutsky says, this is the heart of Unitarian Universalism. No one claims to know the truth, but we know the way to get closer to the truth is to gather as a congregation and try to figure it out together. New people will bring new ideas. Different people will bring different ideas. We can either look at this as a threat or as a gift. In our Time for All Ages this morning, we shared the story of Chester's Way by Kevin Henkes. Chester and his best friend Wilson are very much alike. They are both careful and cautious and like particular things in predictable ways. When Lily, who is a bit bolder and sometimes unpredictable, moves into the neighborhood, they do not see her presence as a gift. They are not curious about their differences. They feel wary. Eventually, they come to see the gifts that Lily brings, the gift that each of them are. And she is grateful for the ways that are particular to Wilson and Chester. They also discover that they have some things in common, and so they celebrate all that they have to share, and that they might learn with and from one another. Theologian and philosopher Henry Nelson Wyman would call this creative interchange. In Wyman's theological model, the source of human good is what he calls creative interchange. When two people interact, they learn something new from one another and absorb that experience into their being. This enriches and changes their experiences of the world. Have you ever seen something differently or experienced something differently because of your connection with someone else? Yeah. The more varied our experiences and the more we interact with different people, said Wyman, the greater the increase of human good. In this very room, on this very Zoom screen, there are different people with varied identities and experiences, different generations, cultures, abilities, and experience and ethnicities. There are people of different classes, genders, sexual orientations, education experiences, people with different theologies and philosophies. So many opportunities for creative interchange. What a gift. Sure, we could choose to keep our circles close and small, only connecting those who cut their sandwiches the same way we do, and who never challenge us to perceive the world from a different perspective. Or we can lean into a bolder welcome, co-creating a more expansive community. In her book, Welcoming the Unwelcome, Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron wrote, "In this very brief time that we have on this earth, we have to ask ourselves how we're going to spend our time. Will we keep increasing and strengthening our neurotic habits in our vain quest for some kind of lasting comfort and pleasure? Or will we make it a practice to step into the learning zone? Let us move and dance in the learning zone, a place where we can expect lots of different folks to show up. And may we be willing to be changed by the beautiful and messy process of creating a bolder welcome. Because we don't always get it right." I'm sorry if that was news. We don't always get it right. We can expect to make mistakes. May we each know that we are held by and are part of a circle of love. A circle that holds us in accountability and in grace. A circle made stronger and more precious by our presence and with each new person who is welcomed into it. May we be bold and loving in our welcome. Shalom, salam, namaste, amen, ashe, and blessed be.